A three-story mansion with more than a dozen rooms, an auditorium that seated 2,000 people, and once hosted a sitting president, a bank he chartered, a park that carried his name. Rent reportedly reaching $6,000 a month when most black Southerners earned a few dollars a week, and the man who built all of it was, at birth, someone else's property. So how does a person who was once owned come to own the busiest street in the South? And why did the city he saved spend a century trying to erase him? The story they skipped. This is a channel about how black communities around the world built wealth, held power, and left a legacy most textbooks quietly skipped. And this is not the rise and fall story you think you know. You have probably heard the phrase, the South's first black millionaire. What you have not heard is how he made it, what he bought with it, and who spent decades making sure you would never find out. The Holly Springs Blueprint. He was born in Holly Springs, Mississippi in 1839. His father was a white steamboat captain. His mother was an enslaved seamstress who died when he was 12. He grew up working the riverboats as a cabin boy, surviving one steamer that burned and sank beneath him and a Civil War capture aboard another. He owned nothing. On paper, he was owned. Therefore, when freedom came in 1865, Robert Reed Church did something that would define everything after. He did not chase a wage. He bought a saloon on Beale Street. This is the thesis of his entire life, and it is worth stealing. A wage depreciates, but a deed compounds. A paycheck can be cut or taxed or taken. A property throws off rent while you sleep, and it can be handed to your children. Church grasped that at a moment when almost no formerly enslaved person in America was allowed to. That single instinct, ownership over income, is the reason there is a story at all. But the instinct alone did not build the empire. What Church did next only makes sense once you understand what the rest of Memphis was about to do. The saloon on Beale. The saloon was the foundation, never the structure. It gave him cash, and cash in the wrong decade is just paper waiting to lose value. But Church treated every dollar it earned as ammunition. He fed it straight back into land, storefronts, lots, and homes along Beale Street, the corridor that would become the cultural capital of Black America. He was less interested in looking rich than in owning the ground rich stood on. And then a disaster arrived that turned his quiet strategy into an empire, buying when everyone sold. In 1878, yellow fever swept Memphis and killed thousands. The wealthy fled, property values collapsed. The state legislature stripped Memphis of its city charter, and for years it was no longer legally a city at all, just a taxing district of Shelby County. Everyone with money ran. Church stayed, and he bought. Therefore, while panicked owners dumped Beale Street lots for almost nothing, he collected them. Then he did something no one expected. When the broke city needed to restore its credit, Church became the first person to buy a $1,000 municipal bond, betting his own fortune on the survival of the place that barely tolerated him. He did not just own property in Memphis. He now owned a piece of whether Memphis lived, and the crown of that empire was about to rise on Beale Street itself. The Park on Beale Street. In 1899, Church bought a tract on Beale Street and built something no Black American had ever owned: Church's Park and Auditorium. The hall seated more than 2,000 people and was valued at roughly $100,000 when it opened, an astonishing sum for the era. It became the beating civic heart of Black Memphis. Concerts, conventions, graduations, political rallies. In 1902, it hosted President Theodore Roosevelt, a sitting president of the United States, standing on a stage owned by a man born into slavery. Picture that for a second. But the auditorium, as staggering as it was, is not even where the real money lived: owning the bank. Because in the early 1900s, Church did the thing that separates the wealthy from the truly powerful. He stopped renting the machine and bought it. He founded the Solvent Savings Bank and Trust Company, the first Black-owned bank in Memphis. Now, he did not just collect rent, he controlled credit. When the Beale Street Baptist Church faced foreclosure, his bank stepped in and paid off the creditors. Sit with what that means. A man who had been property was now the lender of last resort for his own community, deciding who got to keep their doors open. That was not just wealth, it was architecture. If you want the blueprint and not just the highlight reel, subscribe and turn on notifications because a new one drops every week. And Church was building this to outlive him through his own bloodline, the kingmaker. Then his son took the fortune and did something even his father had not. He weaponized it. Robert Church Jr. inherited the bank, the buildings, and the strategy, then converted money into raw political power. In 1916, he founded and financed the Lincoln League, and within months, it had registered 10,000 black voters in a Jim Crow city built to stop exactly that. He organized the first NAACP branch in the entire state of Tennessee. He became a delegate to 8 straight Republican national conventions, and for 2 decades he was arguably the most powerful black Republican in America. A man who could pick up a phone and shape which federal officials got appointed across the South. They called him the gentleman from Memphis. The family that started with a saloon was now choosing who held office. But power that visible in that place was a debt, and Memphis was going to collect. The bloodline. And the fortune did not only buy votes, it bought a voice that changed the country. Church's daughter, Mary Church Terrell, used the education his money made possible to become one of only 2 black women in the room when the NAACP was founded in 1909. She signed its charter. She had already founded and led the National Association of Colored Women under a motto that still defines the work, lifting as we climb. This was the family's real design. Turn rent into a bank, turn a bank into political power, and turn political power into institutions that protect the whole community. Deliberate wealth architecture, not charity, which is exactly why the machine that ran Memphis decided all of it had to go. The reckoning. For years, Robert Church Jr. and the Democratic boss of Memphis, Edward Hull Crump, kept an uneasy arrangement. Crump delivered the machine. Church delivered black votes and federal cover. But in 1940, Church broke ranks and backed the wrong candidate against Crump's will. Therefore, Crump set out to erase the entire dynasty. His administration seized the church properties over back taxes, broke the family fortune, and dismantled the political organization it had taken 2 generations to build. Church Jr. was driven out of his own city and left for Washington. The park his father built was stripped of the family name. And in 1953, the mansion on South Lauderdale went up in flames, burned to the ground in what the city called a fire department training drill. Some called it a message. Either way, the buildings were gone. The real question is what they could never actually burn. The half that mattered. So go back to the beginning. The mansion, the 2,000-seat auditorium, the bank, the $6,000 a month in rent. The man who was born owned. People say the Church family once owned half of Memphis. The deed books do not quite say that. What they say is stranger and bigger. He did not own half the city. He owned the half that mattered. He owned the street where Black Memphis lived and worked and worshipped. He owned the bank that decided who kept their business. He owned a piece of the bond that kept the whole city breathing when the rest of the money fled. He owned access. He owned credit. He owned the machine. Crump could burn the mansion. He could scrape the name off the park. He could not unmake the fact that a man born as property became the landlord of a southern city and left his children enough power to help build the NAACP and the black vote itself. Fame would have depreciated. The ownership compounded for 100 years. So here is the question worth arguing about in the comments. 1. Was buying that municipal bond loyalty or the smartest power move of his life? 2. Was Crump's revenge really about politics or about a black man owning too much? 3. Which was the greater fortune, the real estate or the bloodline that built institutions? 4. If your family had held that Beale Street land, would you have sold or held the line? Tell me below. Subscribe and turn on notifications because next week we open the deed books on another incredible story.